We also have another term that is called ease. Ease, the allowance of space in a pattern for fit, comfort, and style over exact body measurement. Ease is what you put on a garment to make it have allowance. While you are constructing, you can add the ease. The purpose of adding this ease or using ease is to make the garment to fit you, or to make it comfortable, or to create style for that at that particular time. So ease is used. You ease out when you are constructing or cutting out your patterns. Then you have another one that is called edge stitch. Edge stitch. Edge stitch is the straight stitching very close to the edge of a seam. The stitch you make very close to the edge of a seam is called edge stitch. You can also make it very close to the edge of a trim or outer edge. It's made at the edge. So you also have embellishments. This one is very common. We are familiar with embellishment. It's a decorative item added to improve the look of a garment or other projects. For example, you have buttons, beads, jewels, ornamental stitching, and so on. All these can be used as embellishments. Then we have another term that is called right side. Right side. The front of a piece of fabric is referred to as the right side. That is, some people call it face. So where you put outside that it will be visible to people is the right side. But the wrong side, you have right side, you have wrong side. The wrong side is the one that will be inside. Inside that you won't be able to, that is where you do all your stitching. Inside, nobody will see it. So it's the wrong side. You don't turn it outside. You don't turn it outside. But the right side is the face. The wrong side is the one that is used inside. So when you are ready to lay your fabric, ready for construction, you must look for the wrong side and the right side of your fabric, so that you will not go and sew on the wrong side. Then we have another term that is called hem. It's not a term per se, but it's hem. We are familiar with hem. Is the finished bottom edge of a garment. The finished bottom edge of a garment. We also have a term referred to as interfacing. It is used on the unseen side of garments, just to support and stabilize the garment. Unseen side of the garment, that is in between the garment, the wrong side and the right side of the garment. The roadside tailor refer to it as a gum stay. You don't call it gum stay in clothing construction. We call it interfacing. It is used between two pieces of fabric, the wrong side and the right side. So the interfacing is on the unseen side, that is the wrong side of the garment. So it's usually used to support it or to stabilize it. Then we also have another one that is called lining. Lining is a piece of fabric that we use to finish the inside of a garment. It can hide the seam and make the garment easier or more comfortable to wear. No, for example, when you have a fabric that is too soft, the texture is too soft, then you can use lining to make it comfortable, to make it look bulky and comfortable or if you have a fabric that is transparent, you can also use lining to cover it. Then you also have notions. Notions are referred to as accessories used in sewing projects. All the accessories that we use for sewing, they are all referred to as notions. Collectively, they are called notions. For example, you have zip, thread, buttons, hooks and eyes, and ribbons, and so on and so forth. They are all called notions. Also, if I say go and buy your notions, or get your notions for your construction, you now know what I mean. The accessories that you use. Then we have what we call a term that is referred to as raw edge. Raw edge is the edge of the piece of fabric after it is cut before it is hemmed or knitted. If you leave raw edge, the fabric might fray. Fraying means the thread will be pulling up. So whenever you are doing your construction, raw edges must not be seen. This is what I always look out for after you might have finished sewing your garment. There shouldn't be any raw edge. It must be knitted. So the raw edge of the raw edge is referred to as a piece of fabric after it is cut before it is hemmed or knitted. Then we have seam. Seam is also the line which two pieces of fabric are held together by the thread. The line where the two pieces of fabric are held together by the thread is referred to as seam. That is the seam line where you sew your garments. Then you also have seam allowance, another term. Seam allowance is different from seam. Seam allowance is the width of the fabric beyond the seam line. The standard seam allowance is 1.5 cm. So seam allowance is beyond the seam line. So if you sew on the seam allowance, you are cutting off the seam allowance, and the fabric or the garment might not fit, might be too tight if you cut off the seam allowance. So that's why you have seam allowance after the seam line. So you only sew on the seam line and leave the seam allowance. So seam and seam allowance, seam line and seam allowance are not the same. Then you have top stitch. Top stitch is a line of stitch that is parallel to a seam or edge, sewn from the right side. It can be decorative. It can be used as to add to the strength of your garment. So the top stitch is a line of stitching parallel to a seam or edge. You also have under stitch, a term called under stitch. When the seam allowances are stitched to the facing along an edge, you refer to it as under stitch. When the seam allowances are stitched to the facing along an edge, it is referred to as under stitch. You also have wadding, a term called wadding. A wadding is a material used for filling items such as quilts or duvet. It's used in between the quilt and the fabric for quilting, the fabric for duvet, and the lining. It is in between. So it gives the quilt or duvet strength or bulkiness. So you see, when you use it, some people call it fiber, but we call it wadding. You can also call it fiber, but the common term used is called wadding, wadding. That brings us to the end of this class. Till next week. If you have questions, send to me.